So when she says, I also told her I thought her family was sick because not one of them could maintain a functional relationship with a man, and they were perfectly content to undermine hers. I'm like, I understand that y'all don't like this author. I understand that she's mean and she's rude in the way that she talks, but she telling the truth. She trying to tell y'all. She trying to tell y'all the truth. I'm thankful I had a relative tell me, hey, the good sis is trying to undermine your marriage, sis. You might want to be careful about listening to her. Hey everybody, this is Bindi Mark, and I am back with part 2 of the review of the book called The Proper Care and Feeding of Husbands. So in the last video that I did, I covered chapters 1 and the introduction in chapter 1. And today I'm going to be going over chapter 2 and chapter 3. I will say I'm going to put this disclaimer at the beginning of every video because, as I stated in the first video, this book is controversial, and so I expect that it's going to be polarizing, that it's going to rub several people the wrong way. With that said, I am a Christian, and so for me, biblical standards and principles, I view them as rule of law. And then the other disclaimer that's actually written into the book, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but essentially what the author is saying is that in situations of abuse, addiction, or adultery, this book and its teachings really don't apply. And so use your discretion as you're applying this book to your life. But anyway, before I get into any specific excerpts, I wanted to talk about, today I'm just gonna go over chapter 2 and 3, but I've actually read much further than that. And so I do have an idea about why so many people found this book to be offensive. And one of them is that the tone that the author uses is quite condescending, insensitive, and it's just not loving. And I think that's important to state. If you're going to start reading this book, I still, again, as far as I've read into it, I believe that this book is filled with gold, practical gold that can be applied to marriage, but you're going to have to mine for it through contempt, through a lack of empathy, and really a lack of love from this author to other women. She herself is a woman, but she just doesn't appear to have much love in her heart for women. And so I can see why when a woman is reading this book, it's really hard to extract the meaningful aspects from it, because the author is just so insensitive in her delivery of how she speaks to people. Like, she is admonishing women to have the utmost respect for their husbands while actively disrespecting every woman that is referenced in this book. And it's really sad, but regardless, I am choosing to extend to her what she is not extending to her female counterparts, which is grace. And I'm going to continue reading the book despite her disrespectful tone to women, because she actually does have many valid points, and I'm not going to throw away the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. And there is a lot of bathwater in here, so don't get me wrong, there is a lot of bathwater, but there is still a baby in here. There's so much in this book that actually yesterday I put the book down and I went to my husband and I just apologized to him for so many things that this book actually brought to my attention as grave error, and not just because she's saying that it's the wrong thing to do. This lady is not a Christian, but much of what she's saying, wives don't do this thing, the Bible itself has said wives don't do this thing. She's stating it in a practical way that I think causes clear conviction, but she's not saying anything that the Bible itself is not saying. And so there's so much validity in the book that I went and I apologized to him for so much of the things that I've done that I now realize are wrong because of having read this book. But anyway, I'm going to move on. So we are in chapter 2. Okay, so she says, I can't understand why a wife would see her husband wanting to spend time with her as a bad thing. They have been married 20-something years and he still wants to be with her. That's a huge compliment. This is not about controlling her. context, this is a husband whose wife has a job that's so demanding that she is unavailable all weeknights and all weekends. And he essentially gave her an ultimatum and said, it's either me or your job. And so to that, the author says, I can't understand why a wife would see her husband wanting to spend time with her as a bad thing. They have been married 20-something years and he still wants to be with her. That's a huge compliment. This is not about controlling her. This is about wanting to have a life with her. How sad that she might not see that in time. This mentality is the ugly part of the feminist movement, which supports personal success, acquisition, accomplishment, power, and the feminist political agenda over love, marriage, and family. When Karen Hughes, a counselor to President Bush, decided to resign to move back to Texas and spend more time with her family, many feminist spokes-types accused her of selling out women. Whatever happened to choice? I think that there's something important in this. That's when she says that personal success, acquisition, accomplishment, power are prioritized over love, marriage, and family. Yeah. Guys, what are your thoughts on that statement alone? I personally am inclined to agree with her. I think that feminism has done a beautiful work as far as kind of encouraging mutual respect between men and women and causing men to regard women as they're different but equal counterparts. Like, men and women are not the same. We have our differences, and I enjoy relishing in those differences, and yet neither one of us is more or less valuable than the other. And so kind of having just that mutual respect, I think feminism helped to bring that to the forefront. However, I think some of the unintended, or at least some of the aspects of feminism that don't really speak to me, that I have seen, even if you don't want to call it feminism, whatever you want to call it, in my own family structures prior to getting married, in my family of origin and extended family, I did see this prioritization of personal success, acquisition, accomplishment, power, and in the process of attaining those things, sacrificing love, marriage, family. And that is where I personally had to, I was like the person pulling the string on the bus, and I'm like, I have to get off at this stop, because that was the point that I couldn't go further. I don't know that that there, again, as a Christian, I don't know that I can biblically say that power, personal success, acquisition, accomplishment is so important that it is okay to sacrifice marriage, family, and children in the process of attaining those things. What that looks like for each woman may look different. And I'm not saying that you working means that you have sacrificed your family for the purposes of, because again, I think that life can be a little bit more nuanced than that. However, I do think that there is a kind of striving to achieve that can encourage women to sacrifice really the most meaningful and important aspects of life. And I don't even think that this is just a women thing, but there have been men who have achieved incredible professional success, and on their deathbeds, their final words is that, I wish I spent more time with my family. It's like all of the accomplishment was all for naught, because that striving, that accomplishment, distracted them from really the most important aspects of life. Here the book says, so much of the mail I receive from young women tells me a terrible story about how they feel compelled to look at life in only one way, and that way leads them to minimize the value of family and marriage to their souls and psyches. At the same time, they maximize their drive for financial conquest thanks to the messages of society, the choices of their friends, and even the pressures of their own families. That's me, y'all. The last part. They tell me how they are made to feel foolish, weak, and stupid for wanting to raise their own children instead of using nannies or daycare, or for working only part-time outside of the home, if at all, instead of having equal fiscal strength to their husbands, even for yearning for marriage at all, instead of just shacking up or having babies on their own. I feel like we can stop right there. Again, this book, I get it, it's offensive. But also for me, it's super validating, because literally it's like she's taking the words out of my mouth. Much of the pressure that I felt to what felt like to me to abandon take marriage and children out of the priority and instead replace it with professional accomplishment. That pressure came from my family, and it came from the women in my family, not from the men. I mean, the men were there and they were kind of, if they were following their wives and pressuring me if it came to that. But most of the time it came from women. And they tell me how they are made to feel foolish, weak, and stupid for wanting to raise their own children or not working outside of the home and sacrificing equal physical strength to their husbands. Literally, that is exactly what happened to me. How many of you guys relate to that? Like, how many of you guys can say that that was your experience, or you were made to feel stupid and weak? Man, this is really hitting a sensitive area for me, because it is describing my life. It's describing my life. She goes on to say, these women tell me how their own mothers or mothers-in-law deride them for being lazy or being stay-at-home moms rather than having careers, and how their own girlfriends demean them for wanting to marry and to take care of their man, and they talk of the loneliness they feel in their neighborhoods because so few of their compatriots share their family-directed values. I can't say that I ever got any negative feedback from friends, but definitely from the mothers, and I don't want to get too, I'll just say the women in the family. The women in the family definitely had a lot of negative things to say about my decisions to dedicate myself to my husband, my children, and my home. She goes on to say, many married women with children are wearing themselves down to the point that ill health and ill temper are the result. The problem is not with the demands of their husbands and children. The problem is with their notion of a full life. Having it all begins to approximate a jack of all trades and master of none. It is also a self-perpetuating trap. If the work is demanding and draining, and your time is limited and your temper isn't, guilt usually drives one toward more activity for children to make up for the neglect and mistreatment. That translates into frenetic schedules of extracurricular activities, which end up overextending and stressing the children as well as the parents. Fast food dinners on the fly start substituting for healthy, nutritious, joyous, intimate family dinners, resulting in isolation as family members all do their own thing. Again, I think the issue is that she's so direct in the way that she speaks that many people read this and they see themselves in the book and they feel judged, and to like soothe that feeling judged, they attack the author. And I'm like, I get it, but she's right again. It's like she's right again. She started out with saying many married women with children are wearing themselves out. Literally, I think that's the case for a lot of women. It is, because actually having it all for most women is actually too much. Like, it is too much to be a wife to a husband, to be a mother to children, work a full-time job, trying to keep the house clean, trying to keep meals together. It is actually too much. Like, it is actually too much. And you can see it because the women are beat down. And so when it says that it results in ill health and ill temper towards their family members, a lot of the time it's not because they want to be quick-tempered or with a sharp tongue or very little patience for their husbands and their children. They have nothing left to give. They have nothing. Many women are so overworked, exhausted, and tired, they have nothing left to give. And so the best that they can offer when they are being quick-tempered, mean with their mouths, just cutting people down, it's not because they want to be that way. They're just exhausted. They're exhausted. And I witnessed that. I have witnessed that, watching women be so overworked that they come home and they ultimately mistreat their family members because they're beat down. They're beat down. She goes on to say, there it is. If you decide that the most important thing about your life is your worker ant role, you'll likely feel drained a lot of the time and resent the obligations you have to your husband and children. Obligations that, ironically, will save you from that feeling of being drained in the first place. You are not loved, adored, and intimately needed at work. Check out all of the competitive backbiting, layoffs, and computerization and mechanization substitutions for human beings going on in the workplace. Meanwhile, you are a goddess to your children and a queen to your husband. I remember one time, this is at the time that I was working full time and I had a newborn, and I remember talking to my boss, who was also a woman, also a Black woman, and I remember just explaining to her, not necessarily as like a direct report to their boss, but just as just like a woman to another woman, and I was telling her how exhausted I was. And I remember she told me something. She was like, Joyce, like, it's okay to work and stuff, but just remember, like, don't prioritize this over everything in life, because if you were to disappear off the face of the planet tomorrow, this company would go on without you. But I don't know that we could say the same thing about your family. Your absence will be far more missed within your family than it will be on our team here at work. And I remember that was such a freeing thing for me to hear, especially from another working woman, for her to just validate that, like, hey, like, don't let this become your whole life, because it is a trap. The author says, these days, so many young women are products of divorce or never created homes, were neglected by career mothers, were indoctrinated by the anti-family feminists throughout their schooling, and are surrounded by a culture that glorifies selfish gratification over sacrifice. It's no wonder so many of them are surprised to not only hear of their obligations to husbands and children, but are also amazed at the gratification derived from doing so. It is for them that this book becomes most necessary. Many women allow themselves to take on the shackles of obligations to all sorts of family members and friends without at all expressing feelings of being oppressed or angry. Many wives allow destructive friends and relatives to visit or move into their homes against the wishes of their husbands, because these wives have decided this good deed must be done, and then, big surprise, they have no time for their husbands. Earlier in the section, she says that, that women are products of divorce, never created homes, neglected by career mothers, that ultimately leads to them feeling surprised that they have obligations to husbands and children. And then they later are also amazed at the gratification derived from seeing these obligations through. I am a living testament to this. I have never felt like more accomplished in the way that I spend my time, energy, effort, and days than I do now by devoting myself to the support, the furtherance, and just the service of my family. There is nothing against honorable work. There's nothing against the employers that I had previously, because many of the employers I had were good employers, but not a single one of them delivered to me the gratification and fulfillment that I feel in serving my family. Even being a business owner is not as gratifying to me as my service to my family. Okay, and so moving on to the next part of what I'm going to read. This is a situation of a woman who has separated from her husband, moved back in with her sisters who have children but are unmarried, and whose mother was sick, who was also living in the home. And so, like, there was just a lot going on. And her husband is like, I want to get back together. Let's not be separated. And the wife is asking for the husband to relocate to where her family is, as opposed to staying at the place where she lived, where he still resides. He's gainfully employed, working a very good job at a company. The wife says, well, he says he is willing to come here and find a job. The author, Dr. Laura, says he has a job. I can't believe you would demand that he give up security for the insecurity of trying to find a job. It's about time you actually left your family. When you got married, you supposedly formed a new one. You had unmarried, unencumbered older sisters around, medical support, hospice help, but you took this all on yourself and abandoned your husband. What if it had been the other way around? What if all he paid attention to was the child, his mother, and his family and where he wanted to be living and how he felt and how exhausted he was and how frustrated he was, and he completely ignored you. You would be feeling like there was no point for you, that you had no place in his life. The wife says, right, that's how he feels. And Dr. Laura says, where did you get this mindset that made this okay? And the caller says, I don't know. And then the author goes on to say, actually, she did know, but somehow didn't realize it until I probed. It turns out that there are no men in her family at all. No father, no husbands for the older sisters, no men involved with the family the whole time she was growing up. Her mother and sisters were all divorced. Since men were never an issue, her husband wasn't an issue until now. This excerpt hit me like a ton of bricks, because if you watched my very first video about explaining what being a housewife is like for me, there is literally an entire side of my family on the maternal side where there are no men. And I did go over that in that video. And the same kind of mentality of looking at men, especially not men, husbands, as expendable, people that don't really have a say, don't have a voice, certainly don't have any hierarchy or authority, because there were just no men there. There were no men. And so there is no deference extended to men and how they feel. And I felt so convicted while reading this. Like, I felt so convicted. I had to apologize to my husband. Man. And the reason why I'm pointing it out is because there is a theme of us wives sometimes having a hard time reassembling our loyalties. Many of us can have an extreme loyalty to our family of origins, which I actually think is appropriate. When you're a child and you're growing up in your family's home, in your parents' home, your loyalty and obedience should be to your parents. But once you take on a husband, your loyalties do not belong to your family of origin anymore. And actually, to put someone or any other relationship before the relationship that you have to your husband, I think is sin. But it's a call that you are to prioritize your spouse, even if it means forsaking all others. That's a forsaking. That's a strong word. And I did not do that. Sadly, I didn't do that for many years. It's even, I have to admit, it wasn't, I'm coming up on a decade now in my marriage, and it wasn't until recently that I really figured out how to sever that, at this point in my life, inappropriate loyalty to my parents and reassign that loyalty to my husband and not let any other relationship come before my relationship with my husband. And that means having steady boundaries that in the event someone is trying to weasel their way and make a wedge between my husband and I and bring my loyalty to them as opposed to my husband, I have to cut that off. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you stop talking to people, but it might mean that in the middle of a sentence, you may have to say to someone, oh no, I feel like what you're doing right now is trying to come between me and my husband, and that's really not appropriate. I have to go. I have to get off the phone. Whatever you have to say, it might have to be that direct and uncomfortable. And I'm speaking to myself because for so many years I failed to do this. And I think I was in sin, honestly. I think I was sinning against God, who was the one who said, leave your father and mother and cleave to your wife. He was speaking to the man, but it applies to the woman as well. Let's make it about the wife. Leave your father and mother and cling to your husband. I did not obey that for many years, and my husband paid the price for that, and I had to apologize to him for that because I take responsibility for it. And so, not an easy thing to read, but a very important thing to bear in mind if you are a young wife, and even worse if you're not a young wife, but if you're a new wife, and even worse if you're not a new wife, but you're still struggling with it. You've got it. We have to do this. We have to obey the Lord when He says to cling to your husband and to leave your father and mother in an effort to prioritize that of your husband above all other earthly relationships. That's a command. And it is sin when we don't do it. I was in sin when I didn't do that. The author went on to say about this situation, Karen went on to explain that her main problem was that she felt so obligated to her family, she didn't know how to get out of it. I reminded her that when one is married, the spouse and children go to the top of the obligation list. I also told her I thought her family was sick because not one of them could maintain a functional relationship with a man, and they were perfectly content to undermine hers. If that is not a word, I don't know what is. I hate, I gotta be careful because I'm not trying to put my family out there. I won't put my family business out there. I'll put my own business. I won't put their business out. But this is my family in a nutshell. This is my family. Okay. If you come from a similar family structure where there are no men, and you yourself are a married woman, understand that while the female members of your family may not even be meaning to, I'll say it like this. I remember one time, I was extremely close to my grandmother, extremely, extremely close. She was my friend. She was my counselor. She was the one who really, really sincerely introduced me to Christ. She was the one who taught me how to approach the Bible, how to read the Bible. I could take spiritual questions to her. We would pray about it. We would read the Bible together. She was really like, in many ways, a spiritual leader to me. And so when she died, that left a huge void in my life, a huge void. And I was trying to fill that void with other female members of my family. And at the time I was a new wife, and I was, having the struggles of new marriage and how do we navigate this. And I remember there's one particular female member of my family that has a particular disdain and disrespect for marriage and men. And I was kind of getting closer to her. And the advice I was getting was like not really in line with the Bible, but I was like, okay. Then I had another female relative that said, hey, you know what? I know that you really love that person that you're trying to like use as the person to fill your void that your grandmother left. But if you take that woman's advice, she is going to see to it that you are single for the rest of your life. That little statement that she made held true. And still holds true. If I give that person opportunity to undermine my marriage, that person takes it because they have a specific disdain for marriage and for husbands. So when she says, I also told her I thought her family was sick because not one of them could maintain a functional relationship with a man, and they were perfectly content to undermine hers, I'm like, I understand that y'all don't like this author. I understand that she's mean and she's rude in the way that she talks, but she telling the truth. She trying to tell y'all. She trying to tell y'all the truth. I'm thankful I had a relative tell me, hey, the good sis is trying to undermine your marriage, sis. You might want to be careful about listening to her. And I'm telling you, this author is trying to, and this doesn't apply to everyone. If you don't have a situation like this, if you come from a family where men and women are equally respected and there's healthy relationships there, this doesn't apply to you. But unfortunately, that is actually not the majority. The majority of people do not come from healthy, functioning marriages where people have been married the whole time. There's no divorce. Like that's a rarity. And so chances are you maybe come from a family similar to my own. You need to be careful about this. You need to be careful because there are members of your family who, because of their own dysfunction, will seek to undermine the health of your marriage if you allow them. And thank God the Lord spared me and didn't allow me to destroy my marriage and taking counsel from someone whose intentions were really not pure. But that could have been me. And I'm like, please if you can get past her rude tone and make it to the end of the book, she has nuggets of wisdom in here. You got to dig for it because she's, like I said, she is kind of rude in the way that she talks, but the truth is in here and it is worth reading. All right, I'm going to finish out the last thing that I had noted in chapter 3. She says, now I can just hear some wives annoyed that this book is aimed at them. After all, I'm sure they're saying, don't men have any responsibility? Why is it on our backs to change for them? Where is her book on the proper care and feeding of wives? No, I probably will not be writing about the care and feeding of wives. Why? because the truth is that when it comes to home and relationships, women rule. This is the book about how to rule wisely and lovingly. If a woman does not marry a sociopath or narcissist, then she's got her basic male package. And your basic male is a decent creature with simple desires to be his wife's hero, to be his wife's dream lover, to be the protector and provider for his family, to be respected, admired, and appreciated. Men live to make their women happy. The cruelest thing a wife can do to a husband is to never be happy. And don't forget, being happy is more an attitude than a reality. I thought that this was a really important thing to include in here. The cruelest thing a wife can do is to never be happy. That was something that I also had to apologize to my husband for, just because I'm not saying that I don't ever have permission to have moments of unhappiness or disappointment, but I do think that perhaps God has built in a kind of fail-safe within the marriage by kind of giving a man this innate desire to please his wife. I think that that is true. I think that he put that in there. And so the displeasure of a wife actually does have a significant impact on a man. In my mind, the displeasure of a wife is to be used like salt when cooking food. You don't want to overwhelm the dish with salt because it'll taste bad. It'll make the whole thing bad. And in a similar way, you don't want to overwhelm your marriage with your own displeasure because it's going to make the whole thing bad. But instead, salt is to be used sparingly, to be sprinkled over, to add some seasoning to flavor to the dish. And in the same way, your displeasure as a wife, your unhappiness should be used sparingly, sprinkled here and there. That might be used to cause some adjustments, but the overall sentiment of your attitude in your marriage can't be one of unhappiness and displeasure, because it's just crushing to your husband. And I realized in reading this, like just thinking back, like, yeah, he did say like, it's hard to make me happy. Like, dang, he did say, it feels like you're never happy. Like, so I did have to go back and apologize to my husband for that. And, yeah, the cruelest thing a wife can do to a husband is to never be happy. And don't forget, being happy is more an attitude than a reality. I think another way to say it might be being happy is a decision more than it is a feeling. And I was like, I'm going to take that to heart. I'm going to take that to heart and consider that my being satisfied, my choosing to be content, is just that, a decision as opposed to an emotional destination to arrive at. I'm going to take control and take the reins of the emotional climate of my home by choosing contentment, by choosing to be satisfied, thereby setting my husband at ease and therefore setting the whole family in a good place. Anyway, there is one thing that I wanted to add to. I didn't include this in my first review, and I want to make sure I do it now. I think that it's good as wives to read books about how to please your husband and how to best interact with your husband, but not specifically for the husband's sake. I see my marriage, and I think I see marriage overall as just a new avenue, a new arena to demonstrate obedience and love to the Lord. So if the Lord tells me, in the context of your marriage, I want you to respect and love your husband, I'm going to do my very best to learn how to respect and love my husband, not primarily for my husband's benefit, but because I want to bring pleasure to my Father. Like, I want to please my Father. I want him to look at my conduct in my marriage and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. I am well pleased with you. Like, that's what I want. That is what motivates me to read books about marriage. That is what motivates me to read books about how to parent, how to mother. That is what makes me dedicate and really exert energy and effort into making my home the best it can be. Not primarily for my husband to kind of pat me on the head and say, good job, wife. I want that from the Lord. I want that from the Lord. So I want to love my husband to the best of my ability. I want to respect my husband to the best of my ability, not primarily because of my husband, but primarily because of my father. Because I love God and I want him to look at my marriage and be honored by it. You know, like that's really the point. And I think that sometimes that if that's not specifically called out, it can look like I am doing everything just because I'm like trying to bend over backwards for my husband or for a man. But that's not actually what it's about. I want to bend over backwards for my husband to ultimately honor my Father in heaven. I want God to be honored and blessed by the way that I'm conducting myself as a wife and as a mother. That's all I want. And so that's what I think should be the motivation behind loving and respecting your husband, is that you want to please the Lord. And that way we're not blurring the lines about like, oh, you're just trying to be a subservient servant to your husband. Well, kind of, but not really for my husband's benefit, but for the Lord. I want to do this for God. And so anyway, thank you guys for sticking around with me to do chapters 2 and 3. Let me know what your thoughts are on these chapters, anything that I discussed in this overview. If you agree, disagree, let me know in the comments section. Let me know why. The last video, I had some interesting comments and it was really interesting to read through them. But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in and I will see you next time.